$900,000 is about the amount of money that we need if we're going to want to retire by 2030. Now, looking at Nvidia stock, I want to see how many shares we're going to need of Nvidia stock today so then we can get to that $900,000 goal so then we can start retiring, living our dream lives by 2030. Now, let me show you some of the math so then you can actually understand where I got this $900,000 number from. So first of all, we have to understand that we're going to want to retire for 25 years. The average retirement is actually a length of around 18 years. So this is actually going to be even longer because hopefully we're going to want to retire early. Next, it's the idea that the average US family household spends around $60,000 US every single year on just straight living expenses. But it's crucial to understand that that's how much they spend in 2022. Now, with an inflation rate that's a benchmark of around 2%, I actually brought it up to 3% just because we're starting to see some really high inflation numbers right now. So let's actually look at 3% increased inflation per year. That actually gets us to around 2030 of around $78,000 spent annually on expenses. So now that we know all that brings us down to our last part, and that's our retirement calculation. So once we actually have the $900,000 from our Nvidia stock by 2030, we can actually sell that into something a little bit more safe, like an S&P 500 index that should return us about an 8% inflation-adjusted rate of return per year for the next 25 years, which means that once we actually sell, and actually take out that $78,000 per year for 25 years, we're going to need $1.95 million. You can sort of see how this actually plays out year by year. So we're actually taking out that $78,000 and replacing it with that 8% bump from the actual S&P 500 returns. So if everything actually played out to be the way that we wanted it to, we should actually be left with $153,000 after our 25-year investment. But this leads us to the actual question of how many shares are we going to need of Nvidia stock if we want to retire off this stock by 2030. So this is how I did it. I took 4 different analysts or sites that actually predicted long-term forecasts for Nvidia and then placed them on a different reputable scale between their lowest, prediction all the way to the Super Bowls that actually have maybe a little bit too much hype in the stock. But regardless, we're going to actually chart it all out, and then you guys can decide for yourselves which one you think could be most believable. Just a side note though, all of these predictions actually come with no share dilution, no buybacks, and the dividends do not change. And as of the time of recording this video, the actual price of the stock was around $212 a share, and the market cap was around $530 billion. Now actually, let's jump into it. So just looking at our first forecast here, we can see that there's going to be an 8% compounded annual growth rate, which is much below what we're actually seeing from the company right now. But still, that leaves us with a valuation of around $1 trillion. This also shows an ending price of around $423.79. So obviously with this forecast, 8% is a lot lower than the growth rates that we're seeing today, okay? But you have to understand that with this sort of valuation, there's going to be a lot of valuation compression. This could mean that, growth rates start to slow because competition could be a lot stronger, or that valuation compression, for example, like their price to sales ratio of 20 times actually starts to go back to closer to a sector average, which might be closer to about 11 or 12. So although the company could still be growing like crazy and the revenues could start to continue to climb sky high, the amount that people are willing to pay as a multiple for the company actually starts to get impacted. But I know what you guys want to know. How many shares, Tanner, am I going to need of this stock if, let's say, it only grows by 8% per year? Well, if you actually divide that current price by $900,000, which is the amount that we need, you're going to see around 2,124 shares needed to retire, or around $450,000 needed if you're buying your stocks at around $212 per share. This could actually get you as close to that $900,000 figure if this is the outcome that you think is going to happen with all that sort of valuation compression that you see from this stock going forward. Now, just jumping straight into our next tier of forecast that comes into our mid-level, this is actually going to show a 15% compounded annual growth rate, or around a valuation of around $1.8 trillion. This also shows that by 2030, the price of this stock, without any sort of dilution or share buybacks or anything along these lines, would be around the price of $745.79. Now, this forecast is actually what I think to be a little bit more believable than the low forecast. It's just a little too low. I think they're definitely going to be worth a lot more than $1 trillion, considering the need for semiconductors going forward. And I also don't think that the competition is going to be able to ramp up fast enough to actually take Nvidia's place in a lot of their sectors that they're dealing in, like gaming, for example. But how many shares are we going to need if the price actually does rise up to $1.8 trillion or $745 a share? Well, we can see if we're actually dividing it by that $900,000 that we need, 1,207 shares to retire, or $256,000 if needed, if you're going to be buying it at this 212 valuation like we're using for today. Now, I want to preface that although we're only in the mid-tier category and we're already seeing valuations of $1.8 trillion, like that's already bigger than Amazon, for example, but this is actually more likely than we could actually think. Between now and year end of 2030, that's over 8 years away, okay? So this is a ton of time to actually use our compounding growth and continue to grow on what is a total addressable market that continues to grow every single day. Semiconductors might be the most precious thing needed in manufacturing right now, as we're even starting to see products like mattresses actually need computers in them these days. But with all that out of the way, let's actually jump into the high category of forecasts, which we can actually see at a 25% compounded annual growth rates, or a market cap just valuated at around $3.75 trillion. This also leaves us with a share price of $1,523.56. But the important thing is how many shares are we going to need? And that, whenever divided by 900,000, always, okay, that leaves us with 591 shares needed to retire, or $125,292 if you're buying at today's prices of $212 a share. And now I always want to preface my pure hope categories with big disclaimers, okay? The longer that you forecast out, all the way to 2030, the least likely these things are going to happen. It's why very many analysts don't even do 2030 forecasts. They barely even do 2025 forecasts just because of how different a company can perform even quarter to quarter. With that being said, it still is a fun thought experiment. And this is all it is purely for entertainment, just to look at these numbers. But whenever we do actually look at the pure hope category, we can see a 32% compounded annual growth rate, a valuation market cap of $6.5 trillion, leaving us with a share price of around $2,579.30. I will be a very happy camper if that actually comes to fruition, but let's actually look at the actual amount needed, and that's going to be around only 349 shares needed to retire, or $74,000 if you're buying at $212 a share. Now guys, that is the full forecast, okay? Those are all the different ones going from the most bearish to the most bullish, but it is important to know that two things. One, this is merely done for entertainment, and it's not actually meant to be taken too seriously, because like I said, it gets very inaccurate the longer that you actually forecast out, as well as the fact that all these numbers were also done in completely tax-free environments, okay? So depending on the way that you're actually investing in Nvidia stock, these numbers can change dramatically whenever you actually go to sell due to capital gains and these sorts of things. But if you guys are looking for similar calculations and potentially other stocks that you might like, you might want to check out my SoFi video, retiring on that stock by 2030. But if you haven't already, make sure you guys like the video and subscribe down below if you want to see more financial content just like this.